Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the Omicron variant of the SARS coronavirus 2 and the threats posed by it. It also helps us understand the measures being put in place by India to help prepare the country to deal with the fallout of the Omicron threat. See, the Omicron variant, which was first detected in South Africa, has spread very quickly around the world and has even led to a surge of infections in several countries. After being classified as a variant of concern by the WHO, many countries rushed to bring back restrictions in order to prevent the spread of Omicron from southern Africa to other parts of the world. But despite the restrictions and the strict measures, this variant of the virus has already spread to more than 100 countries and is said to have the potential to trigger the next wave of infections. In fact, we are already witnessing this across Europe in countries such as United Kingdom, Denmark, and as well as in the United States, where the Delta variant has already been overtaken by the Omicron variant. There are two major concerns with regard to this variant. One, it is highly transmissible as compared to the previous Delta variant and is said to be nearly three times more transmissible than the Delta variant. In several countries where the next surge is being witnessed, the doubling time of the cases has come down to just around 2 days, which means the number of cases are doubling once in every 2 days. So, this high transmissible rate of the Omicron variant has already started burdening the healthcare system in several countries, including those across Europe, Africa, and North America. Then, two, the Omicron variant has been able to break through the immunity offered through vaccines and as well as through natural immunity offered through previous infections. So, this ability of the Omicron variant to break through vaccines and natural immunity makes it a significant threat for countries around the world. But fortunately, current evidence from these countries shows that the symptoms and the severity of the disease associated with Omicron variant appears to be less severe. In many cases, the patients are asymptomatic, and even if they have some symptoms, it happens to be very mild. And it has also been noticed that the severity of the disease has been lower as compared to the Delta variant. But however, this doesn't mean that we can take the Omicron variant for granted, because its high transmission rate, accompanied with its ability to break through vaccines and natural immunity, can quickly lead to an exponential surge in cases, which could easily overwhelm the healthcare system of any country. Also, the current evidence available from other countries is very limited, and one cannot confidently conclude that this variant is going to be less severe than the previous variants. Because currently, most of the cases being reported in other countries are concentrated in the younger population, and the true impact of the Omicron variant on the older population is yet to be comprehensively studied. So, considering these threats posed by the Omicron variant, India is taking no chances, and several state governments, based on the directions received by the center, have already started bringing back restrictions in order to minimize movement and assembly of people. Along with that, strict entry restrictions have also been brought back at airports to provide for effective screening and quarantine of incoming passengers. Then, yesterday, in a televised address, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the nation and has announced the launch of the vaccination program for teenagers who are in the age group of 15 to 18 years, along with the launch of a booster dose or a precaution dose for eligible frontline and healthcare workers, and as well as for senior citizens who are above 60 years and those who have comorbidities. The vaccination program for those between 15 to 18 years will be rolled out from 3rd of January, and the booster shot for frontline workers and senior citizens shall be rolled out from the 10th of January. So, the expansion of the coverage of the vaccination program and the introduction of a booster dose for the vulnerable has been designed to boost India's preparedness against the next possible wave, which could be triggered by the highly infectious Omicron variant. Along with this, the center and the states are working together to prep the healthcare system, and the Prime Minister has pointed out that more than 18 lakh hospital beds are available, out of which at least 5 lakh beds have oxygen support, along with 90,000 ICUs for children alone. The Prime Minister has stated that India has drawn lessons from the devastating second wave, and to deal with oxygen shortage, more than 30,000 oxygen plants have been set up across the country. Along with this, India's vaccination coverage has been quite impressive, and nearly 90% of the eligible population has already been administered with one dose, and nearly 61% of the eligible population have been administered with both the doses. Further expanding this vaccination coverage is crucial in our fight against the pandemic because scientific evidence has clearly shown that current available vaccines are quite effective, especially in preventing severe disease, even in case of newer variants such as the Omicron. The Prime Minister has stated that all the decisions being made by the government is based on scientific and technical evidence, which has been thoroughly reviewed and deliberated by the National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID 19 and the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization. So, based on sound technical advice and scientific evidence, the government has framed these policies and put these measures in place to help the country deal with the emerging threats being posed by the Omicron variant. But however, vaccinologists and public health experts have raised one concern regarding the opening up of vaccines for teenagers in the age group of 15 to 18 years. Their concern is that if vaccination is opened up for those below 18 years, then a large number of vaccines are going to be diverted away from adults who are yet to receive their first and second dose. This is a crucial point because current evidence shows that COVID 19, even though it affects children, and even though children show symptoms and carry the virus and spread it to others, they themselves are not severely affected by the disease. Whereas, on the other hand, unvaccinated adults, especially amongst the older population, are more vulnerable, and hence few public health experts argue that it should be a top priority to achieve 100% vaccination coverage amongst adults before opening up vaccination for children. But the government is of the opinion that since India has already covered 90% of the eligible population with one dose and 61% of the population with two doses, the time is right to bring even children under the vaccination coverage in order to help contain the further spread of the pandemic. Next, a related article on page number 13 explains the logic behind using a booster dose to contain the threat posed by Omicron. So the writer is calling upon governments and the public to not blindly dismiss the threat being posed by the Omicron variant. Because there are several arguments being made which seems to oversimplify the threats posed by Omicron. Because the threat is being dismissed by a large number of people, as current evidence shows that Omicron only causes a less severe disease, and many seem to be dismissing the Omicron variant as just a normal flu. But the writer cautions against this complacency because current evidence clearly shows that the new variant is highly transmissible and has the ability to break through vaccines and natural immunity, thereby making it a serious threat despite it causing lesser disease, because it definitely has the potential to overwhelm and paralyze the healthcare system. See, scientific evidence from around the world, especially from Brazil and Scotland, clearly shows that the immunity offered through vaccines wanes over time or reduces over time. It's becoming more clear that just two doses of a vaccine is not sufficient to provide lifelong immunity because after a few months, the immunity offered through vaccines is definitely going to reduce. Then, upon that, when you have variants like Omicron, which can break through vaccines and which have a shorter doubling time, it can easily lead to the next major wave, which could not only affect the older and vulnerable population, but could also infect the critical population such as frontline and healthcare workers, as they received their vaccines nearly a year ago. So, as their immunity would have waned, they would be more vulnerable to the Omicron variant. And if a large percentage of healthcare workers were to be infected, it could easily paralyze the healthcare system. And if cases double rapidly over a short period, it could end up overwhelming the system. Hence, according to the writer, there is sound logic to support the administration of a booster dose, especially to the vulnerable and critical population. And he also suggests that mixing of available vaccines is likely to be more effective, as data and evidence shows that a booster dose of the same vaccine is less effective as compared to a booster dose of some other vaccine. But those who are arguing against booster doses, they point out that if a booster dose is launched, then it could result in vaccine shortages, which could weaken our overall fight against the pandemic. While this is definitely a valid concern, the writer offers a suggestion to help prioritize the available vaccines. He says that since the vulnerable and critical population are at greater threat due to Omicron, a booster dose campaign should focus on them, while the vaccination of those who are under 40 years without comorbidities can be stopped temporarily so that sufficient vaccines could be diverted towards the priority focus groups. Then it's also important to draw lessons from the last Delta variant because the current Omicron surge could easily turn our vaccination centers into super spreaders. As the new variant causes more concern, people who have been unvaccinated or those who are looking out for a booster dose are going to rush towards vaccination centers, leading to the crowding of people, thus turning them into potential super spreaders. These mistakes were noticed in India during the second wave caused by the Delta variant, and we need to draw lessons from that and ensure that the vaccination centers do not become super spreaders, as a definite rush is going to be witnessed at vaccination centers, triggered by fears of the Omicron surge. Next, a related article on page number 15 explains a significant development in our fight against the pandemic. Recently, the US FDA has approved two antiviral drugs that have been shown to be effective against COVID 19. This includes Paxlovid and Molnupiravir. Paxlovid is an antiviral drug developed by Pfizer, and it consists of an antiviral component known as nirmatrelvir, which inhibits a SARS coronavirus 2 protein to stop the virus from replicating, thereby helping in preventing severe infection and severe disease. The advantage of Paxlovid is that it can be administered outside hospital settings, and trial data by the company shows a 90% efficacy. This antiviral drug is said to prevent hospitalization and deaths, and thus could prove to be a major breakthrough in our fight against the pandemic. Then the other antiviral drug which has been approved for treating COVID 19 is Molnupiravir, developed by Merck and Ridgeback Biotherapeutics. This medication works by introducing few errors into the genetic code of the SARS coronavirus 2, which in turn helps in preventing virus replication. But since this drug directly meddles with the genetic code of the virus, its usage and administration is strictly restricted in order to prevent any misuse or wrong administration of the drug. But however, initial data shows that both the drugs do have the potential to reduce the severity of the disease, thereby help in preventing hospitalization and deaths. But of course, these antiviral drugs also come with side effects, which not only includes regular side effects such as diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, etc., but the usage of Paxlovid in people with uncontrolled or undiagnosed HIV may lead to the development of HIV drug resistance. Also, the components of the drug can cause liver damage, especially to those patients with pre-existing liver diseases, and hence it is not recommended for those suffering from liver diseases and kidney diseases. Even Molnupiravir has thrown up a few side effects, but an analysis of the cost to benefit ratio shows that if these antiviral drugs are used wisely, they can definitely aid our fight against the pandemic despite the few risks that come with their usage. But however, the writer of the column expresses concern about a possible medical apartheid and the rising inequality between developed countries and developing and poor nations, as these antiviral drugs and their components have been patented in the developed Western countries, thereby limiting its access and availability. We have already seen such a divide emerge between developed and developing and poor nations with regard to availability of vaccines. So, a similar inequality can be expected with regard to these antiviral drugs as well, as a result of the abuse of patents and intellectual property rights by the developed nations and by their companies. So, the writer does recognize that these two antiviral drugs mark a significant advance in the management of the COVID 19 pandemic. But however, concerns such as their side effects and inequality with regard to access will have to be sorted in order to make them an effective weapon against COVID 19. Now, let's take up a column from page number 14, which evaluates the state of the Indian economy in the current financial year. The writer examines how the pandemic has affected the Indian economy and in which sectors has the recovery gained momentum and what constitute the headwind and tailwinds for the Indian economy. See, the terms headwinds and tailwinds are used in aeronautics and refers to the direction of the wind which could either aid the flight or which could create a resistance for the flight. A tailwind is a wind that blows in the direction of travel of an object, whereas headwind blows against the direction of travel. So basically, a tailwind increases the speed of the object, whereas a headwind has the opposite effect and reduces the speed of the object. So similarly, even the economy could face a tailwind or a headwind, and the writer examines these factors which could aid the growth of the Indian economy and its recovery, and also the factors which could bring down the Indian economy. See, prior to the breakout of the pandemic, the Indian economy was already witnessing a structural slowdown, and India's GDP growth, consumer demand, and job creation were already suffering. Then came the COVID 19 pandemic, which led to the first lockdown in the country, which was a nationwide lockdown, followed by the first wave of the pandemic. These events completely shocked the Indian economy as governments adopted drastic measures to contain the spread of the pandemic. As expected, this shock event completely disrupted the Indian economy and not only led to a contraction of India's GDP growth to minus 24.4 and minus 7.4% growth in the first two quarters of last year, but it also led to a significant contraction of consumer demand, accompanied with job losses and a major disruption to the supply chain, which ended up clogging various key sectors of the economy. But gradually, as the first wave peaked in September 2020, and as the lockdown restrictions were slowly relaxed by the center and the states, a gradual revival and pickup was seen in India's economic activities, thus leading to a decent jump in India's GDP growth and also led to an improvement on both the demand and supply side. But even before the Indian economy could be completely out of danger, India was hit by a much deadlier second wave. But this time, its economic impact was restricted as compared to the first wave and the first lockdown. Because even though the second wave led to a lot more fatalities, this time the government's response and restrictions were a lot more measured. And as a result, localized lockdowns were placed, which limited the economic impact. So even though the second wave significantly hit India's GDP growth and India's demand supply equation, it did not have the same devastating impact as that of the first wave and the first lockdown. Then, since July this year, the government has been unveiling various measures, and most of the restrictions and lockdowns were gradually lifted, thus leading to hopes of a significant revival in India's economic prospects. The government, on its part, has taken several measures to support the weak and the poor, especially the rural population, migrant workers, and farmers, by guaranteeing them their food security along with basic economic support. On the other hand, to support the industry, the government has launched several schemes and incentives, and through this year's budget, it has given a major push for public infrastructure spending, which it hopes will help revive the economy through the trickle down effect. The government is hoping that its massive spending on public infrastructure is going to trickle down through the layers of the economy, thus leading to an overall improvement in demand, followed by a revival of all other key economic factors. Then, to support all these schemes and programs aimed at the industry and the lower sections of the society, the government is looking to boost its revenue through a very ambitious disinvestment program through which it aims to raise around 1.75 lakh crore rupees. So these measures of the government, accompanied with slowdown of the pandemic and removal of restrictions, has led to a recovery and stabilization in various key sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, mining, electricity, etc. There has been a gradual revival in these activities, accompanied with a stabilization of our supply chains. But however, several other key sectors, which are employment intensive and which are contact intensive, such as construction, hotels and tourism, financial services, real estate, etc., they are still struggling and their growth levels still happen to be lower than pre pandemic levels. So, this current situation of the Indian economy leads the writer to conclude that in the current financial year, a few sectors have definitely staged a revival, but however, a few other sectors are still struggling to overcome the impact of the pandemic. And in his opinion, factors such as revival of demand, boost of exports, increased government tax collection, both direct and indirect, and as well as GST revenue, accompanied with stabilization of the supply chains, might act as tailwinds for the Indian economy, which could boost the recovery of India's GDP. But however, there are a few headwind factors as well, posed by the new Omicron variant of the virus, which is already leading to further restrictions across states, accompanied with the threat of rising inflation, which is hovering in the range of 4 to 6%, along with the possible disruption of supply chains again due to lockdowns, with the possibility of rising commodity prices at the global level, which could further increase India's import bill and trade deficit, which are already at record high levels. So these headwind factors could slow down the Indian economy and its revival. But there are definitely a few tailwind factors which could also boost India's growth and recovery. Now let's look at this article from page number 11, which gives us an insight into phytosanitary measures that are adopted in international trade of agricultural products. See, when agricultural products like fruits, vegetables, etc., are exported to another country, they carry a sanitary risk of bringing harmful pests, worms, and pathogens, which could have an adverse impact on native crops. So, to deal with these threats and to restrict the entry of agricultural products that might carry these pests, worms, and pathogens from other countries, governments usually implement phytosanitary measures where the import of these items are allowed only if the exporter from the other country is able to procure a phytosanitary certificate. Now, this issue has come up because apple producers in Kashmir have raised a serious concern about two quarantine pests which have entered India, particularly Jammu and Kashmir, from Iran. According to reports, two dangerous quarantine pests have entered India, known as Aspidiotus nerd and Onidella auranti, through the import of kiwi fruit from Iran, which has entered India through Afghanistan. According to apple producers in Kashmir Valley, this represents a major phytosanitary threat for Indian apples grown in Kashmir, as these quarantine pests are considered to be extremely dangerous for fruits such as apples. Even before this, fruit imports from Iran are considered to have introduced the codling moth into India, which primarily feed on fruits and destroy fruit crops. So, on the account of this threat, Indian producers have approached the National Plant Protection Organization under the Union Ministry of Agriculture, seeking a ban on the import of such fruits from Iran. In fact, India's Ministry of Agriculture has already written to its Iranian counterpart and has conveyed that the phytosanitary certificate issued by the National Plant Protection Organization of Iran stands cancelled and shall not be entertained in India from 8th December. Farmers and traders in India are worried that the import of such harmful pests into Indian territory, especially into apple growing regions such as Kashmir, is going to have a catastrophic impact on the local economy, and hence they have even been demanding a complete ban on such Iranian imports. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: examine the threat posed by the Omicron variant of SARS coronavirus 2. What measures could help India and the world overcome the challenges? The second question: evaluate how the Indian economy fared this year. Is it out of the post pandemic depression? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. So, this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.